Welcome to the Agents Angle, where we continue to strive to help agents and others get more accurate insights into the wider world of football agents. With me, Jonathan Booker.
And me, Peter Paleologos. Yes, it's time of fresh beginnings for many connected to the football agent industry, not least with many transfer windows opening, but also with the new incarnation of FIFA's football agents exam imminent. This will see a new cohort of fresh faces obtain their FIFA license.
And just when some at FIFA thought they were starting to see others support the legitimacy of the FFAR, a case involving alleged unlicensed agents activity causes FIFA and the FFAR yet more problems.
All that to come in this season finale of The Agents Angle.
Well, we've made it. The end of Season 2 at The Agents Angle. Not quite as many episodes as Season 1, but it's been quite intense at times, and we have certainly covered a lot this season with The Agents Angle from the world of football agency. And despite us flagging a bit with the deluge of FFAR-related developments in recent months, hopefully we won't be guilty of already being on the beach, a tag attributed to many a footballer going through the motions as their season comes to an end.
It's actually quite cold in Australia at the moment, especially southern Australia, Melbourne where I am, Jonathan. But what a second season of The Agents Angle. Very interesting guests yet again. Huge array of topics we covered, from the business, the agent business, to of course, again, the FFAR, to unique regulations in countries, markets, and beyond. I don't want to repeat myself, however, but there's always good content available in the agents world. And it's interesting that I recently engaged with some sports management and business courses in terms of some of the students. And many of the students are actually intrigued by the agent's business, just as much or more so than, say, joining as sports administrators of clubs and leagues. So the agent's business has that sort of sassy image that does attract people. Nevertheless, it is transfer window time, so most agents now need to get on with the transfer business that they've been planning. Therefore, ourselves, we also need to take a break from the podcast.
Yeah, and it's been somewhat a testing week for myself and others, both on a personal and professional level. And it's seen quite a lot of reflection by myself, and I'm guessing many others, not only from the agents world, but from the football world as a whole here in the UK. And as such, I would like to dedicate this episode to Gino Culbertson, a dear friend, associate, and mentor from the football agent world, who sadly passed away 2 weeks ago now, from when this episode is due to be released. But for now, let's get the latest football developments out the way on the technical side of the football agents world. And we can look at that later. And also, if I may, take more time to speak about the positive and important role that Gino played for many and the impact he had on the football agent world as a whole. But just when the football agent world was starting to think there was a little more certainty with regards to agent licensing and regulations, albeit we're still in a very uncertain position, yet another complication has arisen in regards to, yes, you've guessed it, FFAR, the FIFA Football Agent Regulations, and the licensing. And I'm starting to think things are conspiring against us here on the Agents Angle, as these developments always seem to drop or announcements are made once we've recorded an episode of the show. So apologies for the delay in featuring this latest development, but the agents world does seem to evolve not so much monthly, but weekly nowadays. But on the last episode of The Agents Angle, we spoke about a reported investigation by FIFA into the matter of unlicensed agents' activity in Brazil. And to use Peter's terminology, I pivoted that topic to England to challenge his knowledge. But it seems since then that England has had its own unlicensed agent story emerge, with a Swiss twist involving the English FA, a leading British agency, an English Premier League club, and FIFA at CAS.
Yes, Jonathan, all the big players involved in this case at the Court of Arbitration of Sport. It's the case of Jonathan Beckett versus FIFA. I'll just give some background and context of this case, which just came to our attention just as we finished the last episode, as you said. Jonathan Beckett, a UK-based football agent and part owner of Arete Management, was provisionally suspended by FIFA on 16 September 2024 for acting as an unlicensed agent for a period of time and related to a contract extension negotiation of one of his players from Aston Villa. FIFA had alleged that Beckett was circumventing the FFAR by working under a name of a licensed colleague while still actively handling negotiations. FIFA suspended Mr. Beckett's license and barred him from reapplying till January 2026 under several articles of the FFAR. Now, the key issues here and why Mr. Beckett appealed all the way to the Court of Arbitration of Sport was that FIFA's General Secretariat, were they competent to find Beckett ineligible to suspend his license? Did he actually perform football agent services? And was the 16-month suspension lawful and proportionate? But I'll go straight to the findings. CAS ruled that FIFA's General Secretary overstepped its authority by making a final decision. Why did they only do that? It's because under the FFAR, the Secretary may only investigate and provisionally suspend and then send a matter to the FIFA Disciplinary Committee. And that wasn't done in this case. So it was a final suspension, and CAS emphasised that this de facto final suspension by the investigative body, which is the FIFA Secretariat, was unlawful because there wasn't proper due process. So FIFA suspension of Mr. Beckett was set aside in full. His license remains valid. Now, we know that the Agents Tribunal doesn't exist. We know that FFAR, several provisions are suspended. But we do know that the FIFA General Secretariat can still investigate, but right now can't impose final sanctions. That is key, because part of the regulations, and we've discussed this, Jonathan, all along, are suspended, including Article 21, which makes it difficult for FIFA to go through with a final suspension. So the CAS in this case, and I'll just finish on this point, protects the procedural fairness in terms of agents or other actors who come before the FIFA General Secretariat. So very interesting case, and one that I think that a lot of agents are going to keep an eye on, because there was an allegation here of unlicensed activity, Jonathan.
From a non-legal perspective, as everyone has come to expect from me, looking at this matter, the case, and also those involved, it will come as no surprise that I have several observations and not all of them are favourable. Firstly, the FA, the Football Association in England, they seemingly investigated, found a breach of agent regulations, charged the agent, all well and good, but then, to use football parlance, they bottled it somewhat. But that's nothing new with the FA on agent-related matters, going back many years, so I may now be getting a letter in the post or an email. Under normal circumstances, I could accept the reasoning for the leniency from the FA with the charge, because of the confusion over FFAR at the time of the alleged offences. But the agency related to this matter, as I understand it, was one of the agencies involved in the Rule K arbitration against FIFA and the FA over FFAR. So if they weren't more informed of the situation at the time, then who could be? And another related point to raise is, if FIFA judged the FA to not adequately uphold the FFAR, that is arguably a breach in itself. But this case seems to say that FIFA can do nothing on that front either. Now, the club involved, Aston Villa of the English Premier League, and I know some of the people mentioned here, some of them are more cognizant of agent-related matters and regulations than others. But we have to acknowledge it's an absolute minefield for not just agents at the moment, but also clubs and club officials when it comes to agent regulations and their responsibilities at the club. And you and I talk about this all the time. The matter of clubs in general being not only unaware of agent regulations and their duties and responsibilities, but even when they are aware, many are very lax when it comes to policies and procedures regarding agents and agent activity, which leaves them open to breaches of regulations and also various questionable practices. And although we, Peter, haven't dealt in the so-called dark arts ourselves, we know what they are in the agency world. And these problems could and should, in most instances, be so easily avoided with proper policies and procedures in place at club level. Now on to the agent and also the agency involved. There is no mention in this case of the agency's responsibilities. But technically, an agency or the directors and the agents of that agency are responsible to an extent for the activity of others employed by the agency in regards to football agent activity. So a question mark may remain as to whether the likes of the FA and FIFA have addressed that separately or even conveniently forgotten about it. In terms of the main agent figures mentioned, it is important to say that CAS didn't really look at any of the breaches of the agent regulations themselves, and CAS were more focused on FIFA's regulatory process with FFAR rather than the actual alleged infractions. But from what I've read, and it is just my opinion, it seems pretty clear there was a breach of agent regulations on which the FA agreed. And also, arguably, the agency and other agents who may well have been involved. But in terms of FIFA, and I want to put to one side, for now at least, what they have done and haven't done with FFAR, because I think everyone knows I'm by no means a fan of that and can give FIFA little, if any, credit over FFAR whatsoever. And in this case, despite me thinking there is a bit of FIFA posturing being undertaken, if only to project the image of being seen to do something and be active on the enforcement of agent regulations, arguably much akin to the Brazil case we featured in the last episode of the Agents Angle. And some in Miami and Zurich may want to record here. Ready? In terms of their findings and the supposed sanctions that FIFA tried to implement, I think FIFA have done the right thing. One, finding a breach of agent regulations, i.e. unlicensed agent activity. And two, the supposed sanction, which the appellant claimed was disproportionate, unlawful, and misconceived. I think it was actually justified in this case, as a 24-month suspension would somewhat mirror the standard 24-month restriction on anyone applying for a FIFA football agent license if they had undertaken any unlicensed agent activity before applying. So all in all, another procedural gap in the FFAR comes back to bite FIFA on the bum, or was it a convenient outcome for all involved?
Very interesting analysis. As I suggested before, the FIFA General Secretary is not competent to decide on compliance with eligibility requirements. This role belongs to the disciplinary committee. And because part of the FFAR has been suspended, that means in this case, the General Secretariat decision in relation to this matter, this CAS matter, lacks a legal basis and must be set aside. I think CAS followed three systemic flaws under the FIFA football agent regulation, the FFAR. The General Secretary's role is limited to a prima facie belief, not findings or final decisions. The suspension of Article 21 leaves no competent body to investigate and impose sanctions, causing provisional sanctions to become final. So that is an issue. You can't do one with the other. And also, the Secretariat in this case may have overreached. What happens now? Does FIFA's ability to impose disciplinary sanctions on unlicensed agents or other agents under the FFAR, is that undermined due to procedural flaws because we've got suspended provisions? Does FIFA have to introduce reforms to address these jurisdictional gaps and ensure effective enforcement? Because I'll say this, a lot of agents out there who are licensed, have done the right thing, are very, I suppose, angry to see a lot of unlicensed activity out there. However, we've got to make one clear point that regardless of this decision, the licensing requirements for football agents do remain valid and applicable. Now, what about unlicensed agents who may have got themselves in trouble with a federation or with FIFA recently? This CAS award may prompt them to look at where the legal clarity is, and it may be we all have to wait for the European Court of Justice decision to see where it all lands, who's the regulator, what provisions are not suspended anymore. could be a real mixed bag. So I will say this, with this CAS decision and with the decision that's coming up with the European Court of Justice in relation to the German agent cases, the best thing for all agents and also football lawyers or legal professionals is to monitor FIFA's regulatory updates and compliance measures in case anything changes between now and the decision in the German cases, because I think FIFA needs to fill a gap here, no doubt about it. Not being able to enforce actions against unlicensed agents leaves a big gap. I mean, it actually, in a way, undermines the system if you can't take action against unlicensed agents. And I think that needs to be rectified, at least in the interim, Jonathan.
As you rightly said, in general, it just leaves the waters murkier than ever and in even more of a mess. Because if CAS, as it appears to me, has in effect said that FIFA can investigate, they can levy charges for breaches of the FFAR, but they can't impose sanctions, that means one, what is the point of the FFAR as regulations if they cannot be effectively enforced? And two, does it in effect make the license somewhat pointless, if not absolutely worthless? Because it seems from reading the CAS document that FIFA recognised the problem with the suspensions in the FFAR as they ruled on the case immediately, if only to allow the parties charged to go immediately to CAS and appeal the case. They will never admit an error or fault. We've learnt that over the last 7 years with FFAR. So the other questions are, why the suspension of Article 21 in the first place, if it underpins the usefulness of the regulations? What are other provisions that FIFA could have implemented? And what do they do now with FFAR? Do they just continue to let it drift aimlessly? Because really, for me, the FFAR and the subsequent license are pretty much pointless without Article 21 in terms of enforcement.
That's an interesting observation. I will say this, the FFAR is still in play. It's just only parts of it are licensing, because we know this week so many prospective agents are sitting the license, so licensing's still there. CPD, or the continued professional development and education, is still there. Minimum terms that you need to ensure you have in your client representation agreement, they still apply. And it's still important to note that FIFA still retains regulator power. And it's not all one way. There was another agent case at CAS we never covered, a Portuguese legacy agent versus FIFA. And I'll just give you some of the key points and takeaway. That was a win by FIFA, a single legacy football agent, so an agent who had a license before the intermediate regulations came on board. He basically wanted to challenge FIFA in terms of their right under the legislation. So FIFA's FFAR rules disqualifies a person from holding a football agent's license based on a criminal conviction, even if the decision is not final or binding, which in essence deviates from that presumption of innocence. Because if you're convicted of an offence, a lot of people do appeal it. So that doesn't mean it's all over. So in this case, the agent appealed to CAS. However, CAS found in FIFA's favour that FIFA can establish legal principles. So what they did in the FFAR, they removed the final and binding decision, so that I won't take into any appeals. So if any legacy agent or any agent has a criminal conviction, they're not entitled to the licence. And this was appealed to CAS, and at the end of the day, CAS said, yep, obviously with criminal matters you can appeal them. However, FIFA has a right under the regulations in the FFAR. If you've got a conviction currently on foot, we can stop you from having a license. And FIFA did win that case. I don't know if it's been appealed to maybe the Swiss Federal Court or something from CAS, but that was a win for FIFA, and in particular in relation to the character elements of the FFAR, where they can stop agents obtaining a license for criminal convictions. So we never really covered this case, and I don't want to go too much into it, but that was a win for FIFA under these FFAR regulations, Jonathan.
But that was slightly different because that was somebody who was applying to be an agent rather than somebody who had already been granted a license. So again, it comes down to the question, what's the point in regulations when you can't actually enforce them and impose sanctions? And I think on the last episode of the agent angle, when we spoke to Loic from FIFA Pro, we've always said this, is that you can have all the regulations you want, but if you fail to enforce them effectively and adequately, then what's the point in having the regulations in the first place? And of course, we've just had when this episode goes out, the latest FIFA football agents exam. And in just over a week's time, on the 2nd of July, candidates should receive their results and thus whether they can apply for their FIFA football agent license, whatever its true value turns out to be. And it remains to be seen how many candidates sit the exam, how many registered for it, and how many subsequently pass it whenever FIFA decide to release that information, or indeed how they try to spin it, because as one FIFA official linked to agent regulations stated, numbers don't lie. But then again, as always, they can be misrepresented. And increasingly, agents, like many others in the football world, are becoming increasingly reliant on data and statistics. Hence, this season of the Agents Angle has featured various stats from numerous sources, but there is one source that we have increasingly relied upon for some interesting football agent-related insights. And this is primarily because of a seemingly different approach with statistics amongst the deluge that we are increasingly bombarded with. And in our opinion, looking at information that is often more nuanced and either missed or neglected by others.
And with that, today we would like to welcome and formally introduce FFAR Consultancy and its CEO, Timon van Bruggen. As well as providing unique insights on the football industry, FFAR Consultancy helps its clients to make data-driven decisions through client-focused consultancy and providing valuable information with all important explanations. They advise hundreds of players, clubs, and also agents and agencies with insights into not just player performance, player development, and transfer activity, but also the wider football industry that's so often missed. Interestingly, in an article in the New York Times and also the Atlantic in 2024, FFAR Consultancy was featured as a key data resource for football agents and clubs globally. Timon, who's not only the CEO but also the founder of FFAR Consultancy, has a professional history that combines both analytics and marketing, which are both integral parts of the FFAR Consultancy offering. Timon, welcome to the Agents Angle.
Thank you very much. Looking forward to being on the show.
Now, we have to admit here at the Agents Angle, we have used some of your data at FFAR Consultancy, in particular about some of the agencies that work in different countries. But for those of our listeners who aren't familiar with FFAR Consultancy, Timon, can you briefly explain what FFAR Consultancy does and how your work intersects with the football agency world?
Absolutely. So what we mainly do is support agents, clubs, players, but mainly agents, helping them making better decisions based on data-driven insights. So with our reports, we can support them making better decisions, both with their players, but also in terms of their transfer strategy. And that's what we're doing every day for over 5 years with agents worldwide.
What type of clients are you working with in terms of agency? Is it the bigger agencies or individual agents? But also, do you work with clubs, players, and also national federations? And if so, do those relationships or offerings vary between the different client segments?
I think it's a mix between clubs, agents, players, and indeed also federations. I think what they have in common is that they are all looking into the long-term strategy of the players. So it can be a very big agency. We have some big agents that have more than 100 players, but also some boutique agents that want to improve their player on the long run. In terms of the relations, I think it's a little bit different with agents and clubs. What I see within clubs is that on one hand, clubs are working a lot internally. And the agents, they also like to work with companies like us, where the relationship is a little bit closer, as agents are quite often not that difficult in terms of the structure. And what I mean with that is that I normally speak with the CEO, and the communication is way easier between us and agents than with clubs.
You work with agents directly, but you also work with clubs on differing projects. Can you share with us any red flags from the club's perspective that they tell you as FFAR or watch out for when they're assessing pitches or players put forward from agents or even managers or coaches? Doesn't have to just be players. Is there any red flags that clubs look for when assessing agent information or requirements they obtain from agents or CVs put forward?
Yeah, so I think clubs, they have a lot of information. They get smarter and smarter. And I think what they don't like, or what is a red flag, is when agents seem to be lazy. And what I mean with lazy is that an agent send a transfer mark link of a player, and that you have the feeling as a club that this transfer mark link is also sent, or this pitch is also sent to all other teams in the league. Or when player is sent to a club where the level of the player absolutely don't match the quality of the club. So that will cost the club a lot of time. And that's also the reason why clubs like it when the agent is investing in data, because they see that the agent is doing their homework. They see that the agent is only presenting the player to a club that will actually fit. And of course, sometimes there is because every club is using data in a different way. Of course, sometimes the club will not agree with it, but at least they understand and they agree with the fact that the agent is also using data to make smarter and better decisions.
I think it's safe to say that a lot of agents would admit themselves they fall foul of being lazy at times, or being blinkered, or being obsessed with that one transfer, that one club, or that one move.
Exactly.
But in terms of markets, from the information that you work with, and obviously you see all the markets globally and you analyze a wide amount of information, for the agents, at the moment, what are the most overlooked or undervalued markets or leagues that you believe agents could and should be looking at more closely?
That's a good question. I think with the development of data analysis in the last 10 years, there are less overlooked markets. Because, for example, in the past, Scandinavia was very underrated, but with a few very successful players over there, you see that more and more clubs are scouting there. But I think in terms of underrated leagues, for example, there's a club in France, Toulouse, and you see that they are getting also Bologna in Italy, they are getting the best players from the second league in Holland. And they did that over the last few years, over and over. And you see that it's every time very successful. So then after that successful transfer, you see that more and more clubs are, for example, scouting in Dutch leagues. Then there are a few areas where there's still a little bit lack of data, for example, Africa. And I think in the next few years, that will be the market to take a look at it, because there are now a few companies that start tracking data over there. And once the data is useful, I think a lot more countries in Africa will be successful in terms of their transfers.
I think it's safe to say that a lot of agents, with all the data and statistics that are available at the moment, they get a bit overwhelmed by it. And as well as clubs, they've got a smorgasbord of data and statistics, whether it be platforms and offerings available to them, as do the clubs. And it's not like it was 5, 10, or even a couple of years ago when you were there with just a few, whether it be the more generalist aspects of transfer market, exactly, the player stats of Y-Scout, Scout 7, and then the very in-depth analysis of the likes of CIES.
Yeah.
In terms of facts, where do you fit into that landscape, and what makes your approach different, the areas you cover, but also the areas you don't cover as specialists, because you can't cover it all, surely?
No, absolutely. So what sets us apart in the first place is that we are not a platform. We are a consultancy company. And the reason for that is that we believe that every request we get is different than the next one. To give you an example of that is that sometimes we're getting called and the agent wants to get a report to make sure that his player can be presented to a club in the top 5 leagues. And then the other day, his player says to him that he doesn't want to go to a mid-sized team in the top 5 leagues. He wants to go to Barcelona. So then the report will be different, because we have to show the player why he's not good enough to go straight away to Barcelona. And those are just 2 examples of situations, but I can mention 15 different situations also from a club perspective. If there's a platform and they want to get a player, a lot of times finances are not included. A lot of times the feasibility of the player is not included. And that's what really sets us apart. So automate our reports for 80%, but still the human side of 15 to 20% is still in there. And we always make sure that we deliver the report that the agent also can use. For example, if you have a platform and you download an automated report, there are always things in there that maybe for that situation you cannot use. So we always make sure, both from a club perspective, but also from an agent perspective, that the reports we offer, that the investment, because of course you have to make an investment, that it's worth it to make. And maybe the second one is that we use only objective data, which means that, the name is also facts, but we don't like to add subjective things in the report, because we know that the clubs also don't like to get that. So it's only objective data, and that works really well, because then every time they receive the report, it's very, very clear. And we never get questions about data quality or about the data source, because the report is so clear that even a kid of 12 years old can understand the report. And that's very important for our company.
Now, Peter will tell you that I'm very skeptical when it comes to statistics and analytics. And there's a
maybe I can prove you wrong.
Well, in that context, there's a plethora of data out there, and a lot of people in the football world use data and analytics and statistics interchangeably, and there's a big difference, because some of the stats are good, some of them are bad. It's not a case that all are good and all are bad.
Correct.
And they can be used to mislead. But when it comes to such resources in football and compiling those statistics and analytics, what proportion of that out there available to the football market, including the agents, would you say is good, well researched, well compiled, and well queried? And are there any ways that the likes of agents differentiate between the good resources and the bad and the misleading ones?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think over the last few years, for example, if you take a look at the club perspective, 5 years ago, they rather signed a third goalkeeper. Now they sign a data analyst. So from a club perspective, I think that quality really improved. I think agents, they see more and more that they have to use good data companies, good data, that they cannot change the numbers in their way, because as I said before, the clubs are getting smarter and smarter. And if you present data in an incorrect way, then the next time the sporting director will say, well, last time you tried to, I don't know if this is correct, but trick me. Next time when you send a report, please make sure that those are the right numbers, because otherwise I will not take you seriously. So there's so much competition in the world of agents that I think, and that's also what I see, is that more and more agents, they work in a more structured way than, let's say, 5 years ago. Also, I think that if you send a data report, it should be the complete overview of a player. That's also what we do. So if you see a report from our company, you can also see what elements the player needs to improve after he moves. So maybe one thing to add is that maybe what I agree with you is that data can never give 100% of the information, because there are always things that you cannot track with data. So data is, in my opinion, a first filter and the first way of seeing if the player makes sense to check more. And what I mean with check more is video scouting, live scouting, because I think that's still very important. But it can help you when you receive thousands of players as a club to filter those with data.
Timon, I'm always fascinated with your top 10 rankings. You produce these small reports, top 10 agencies doing deals in certain countries. English Premier League, I've seen the Croatian League there, I've seen the Romanian, just heaps of different leagues. How do you come up with that data without giving any secrets away or secrets in terms of the top 10 agencies in each of those leagues or countries doing deals? Because when you do those rankings, you also list the number of deals during a certain transfer windows. How does Fax get that information and do the rankings?
So we have a big selection of data sources. I think that's very important. So we have a lot of information. And what we try to do with the top 10, I think it's pretty successful, is make sure that a lot of potential clients, like clubs, agents, players, are seeing our Instagram page, which happens because we have a lot of followers and a lot of traction on there. And then the next step will be to also show small reports to get them more knowledge about, it's called the player level. So it's the index we use to rank a player. and to show them also which players needs to make a move, because I think that's maybe our USP, to show which players are ready for a move and which are not.
Speaking about players, is there one thing that comes to mind that for you that a lot of agents undervalue or neglect or even miss in terms of their strategy or approach from data perspective, especially in promoting players? What would it be? What are some agents missing in terms of the effective promotion of good players to clubs and to the transfer market in your eyes?
Well, they don't miss this anymore if they work with facts. But what I see a lot in transfers is that, and that's also the reason why we started this company, is that a lot of players make a transfer to a team that, or he doesn't fit in terms of his level. So that's really important, that you transfer your player to a team where the level of the player really fits. And the other thing is playing style. So those are the two key factors we take into consideration with our transfer analysis. Is both the level should fit in the team, but also the playing style, and not only individually, but also in the team. So tactical fit. And then I think the last thing is of course timing. So when are you going to make a transfer? You see a lot of players, they make a move to, let's say, a bigger league when they're not ready yet, or when they are physically not ready yet. We also work more and more with physical data, because you see, especially in a few leagues like the Premier League, the physical data is getting also very relevant. So there are just a lot of parameters that agent, before they work with data, don't take into consideration yet. And then the network or the financial reasons, they wait more. So I think a successful agent, he takes all these factors into consideration.
Now, just to finish, what trends or movements in the transfer market should agents be paying closer attention to right now?
Well, what I see is that a lot of agents also merge. So you see that there are companies that are going to work together. On the other hand, I think that the boutique agents are also very appreciated by the clubs, because they have a quality portfolio, not hundreds of players, but let's say 20 or 30 or maybe 35 players of quality. And you see that clubs, they always trust a few agents. So not making sure that you have too many players, but have quality in your portfolio. The other thing I think is that, well, the world of presenting a player, it will be less important in the future, because I think more and more clubs will filter through data scouting. You even see now a few, and we are also working on that, AI-driven tools shaping early identification of a player. So I think those are some market trends. And of course, as I said before, Africa will be very, very important. Let's say maybe not 5 years, but 10 years. Absolutely.
You read my mind. I was about to ask you about AI and what impact that's going to have in 1, 2, 3 years' time in terms of data, analytics, agency, and club recruitment. So watch your space. We really appreciate you coming on, Timon. Thank you so much for giving us an opportunity of how Facts, not just as a consultancy, the offerings you offer agents, data, insights, and putting the right promotion and facts to clubs is so important. So recruitment and transfers can go much better. So thank you for your time, Timon.
Thank you very much for having me.
That was an absolute fascinating interview with Timon. I think his company, Facts Consulting, probably not known by that many agents, I would say, but a business model where they assist agents and provide a lot of specific services that are tailored. I do love their data, and I'll say this, and I've always been biased to this, they also have data on which agencies are doing the deals in, say, the major 10, 20 leagues, from the EPL to the Greek League, so many other different leagues. But recently, I've seen them offering a little bit more strategic insights. That they've done some recent analysis into the top 6 players by player level, improvement for leagues like Serie A, so which players are improving year by year or season by season. They've done some reports on the top 10 under 21 players by the highest player level in terms of who's under 21 playing at the higher level. And they're looking at League One, they're looking at the EPL, some interesting data there. And then, of course, they've done a bit of an aggregation of the top 10 football agencies in the top 5 leagues in Europe. And I will mention the names. You probably don't want me to, Jonathan, but it seems to be the same big names doing most of the deals, number of deals in the top 5 leagues within Europe. And that's Wasserman, CAA Stella, Unique Sports Group, CAA Base, Roof from Germany, just a few. So those 6 tend to appear in the 5 biggest leagues. When I say the 5 biggest leagues, England, Italy, Germany, France, and Spain, Jonathan.
As you know, Peter, I love scrutinising industry stats and drilling down into the reports that contain them, as many will attest to from listening to the show, especially when we look at reports like the likes of the FIFA transfer report or their agent reports. But agents have a deluge of stats available to them from various providers. And the latest we were hearing was that one of the big games developers are also looking at coming into the field with the stats that are included in their game. So we'll have to watch how that develops over time. And I think it's next to impossible for agents to choose one provider that covers everything and answers all the questions. And it's not fair to say I don't like stats, as nothing can be further from the truth. What I do hate are bad stats and misrepresented stats, and there are plenty of those out there. And so I think it comes down to the agents to know what stats they need, why they need them, how they're going to use them, and to know exactly what they mean, rather than just blindly buy a load of pretty charts and statistics. Because I would guess many of the data sources used for these stats are very similar or even the same. And it is more so the questions asked of the data and the context in which the statistics are presented that makes them different. And if you look at it from a club perspective, I doubt that the likes of Brighton and Brentford in the English Premier League, with their much heralded recruitment models, have access to vastly different data sets to arguably bigger clubs with more resources. And their success primarily comes down to how they query the data, what questions they ask, and how they interpret it and apply it. And that's where the knowledge of people like Timon comes in to really get to the crux of what the client, whether they be a club or an agent, really wants and needs.
Yes, Timon's Facts Consultancy, they provide good analysis and data, which is always developed. They're always trying to improve their data sets and provide those. They don't just cover players, they cover competitions, they cover leagues, they cover clubs, and they, of course, as I mentioned earlier, agencies. Now, we know that what clubs want and agents need to understand interrelate, but there is a different approach to the way the clubs sort of use data. And you mentioned Brentford and Brighton models, and I'm intrigued by their models because I actually think agents can learn from some of the drivers of those models in order to themselves target and isolate players that are interesting. Because these 2 clubs you mentioned, Brentford and Brighton, it's data-driven success in football. I mean, Brentford's approach, they use data analytics to identify undervalued talent and optimise team performance. They focus on aligning player statistical profiles with their tactical philosophy. And that's something that agents need to understand as well. Does this player fit that player model? And we need to know each style or formation or tactical approach clubs in order to put player forward. And we also know that Brentford like to uncover hidden gems in lesser known leagues and markets because they have more of a limited budget. But that's also important for younger agents who find talent in those markets and have a chance to represent those talents. So if Brentford has got this approach, that aligns with younger or newer agents who are trying to find more gems. I know that it's very competitive there in signing players, but if Brentford are scouring, the unknown markets, this gives an opportunity also for lesser known agents to manage those players. Brighton's strategy is a little bit different. They look at player performance, fitness levels, and opposition analysis in their data analytics, and they excel a lot in, I would say, injury prevention. They look at physiological markers and training programs. And I know some agents, and this feeds back into the agent world, Jonathan. A lot of agents tell their players that these are things you need to achieve, get your physical performance up, whether it's gym work, other physical work, especially newer, younger players. I'm not talking about established professionals, in order they can meet those athletic or physiological markers. So you need to know what the clubs are looking at. So the agents are driving their players in relation to that. And the way that football operations have worked, especially with these 2 clubs, us as agents need to know where they've shifted to in the way the decision making happens. And goes back to FFAR's Consultancy. They're trying to provide some innovative and forward-thinking material for agents to use that aligns with what the agents are trying to push players through. And then understanding different teams, like I've just mentioned, Brighton and Brentford and their models. It all works in a way where innovation and using data, you're able to push players more effectively. So there's an interrelationship there, Jonathan, and it's quite an interesting one. It's an evolving one. It's a dynamic one. But fundamentally, agents need to understand the players. They need to understand the game model and recruitment strategy of the clubs, and data that's been provided, tailored, curated like FFAR's Consultancy and other providers are essential tools these days.
But this is one of those times of year when clubs and many agents will be poring over data sets and statistics more than usual in making key transfer decisions and planning their strategies. But a lot of prospective agents have been poring over the FFAR, and we'll see a lot of new agents enter this often crazy and unpredictable industry after successfully passing the new agents exam and receiving their FIFA football agent's license. And as I mentioned at the start of the show, I wanted to dedicate this episode to someone who had a huge positive influence on how I approach the industry, and that is Gino Culbertson, who, as I said, sadly passed away recently after stubbornly battling illness for some time. And to begin with, Gino was very much a mentor to me, not so much in a hand-holding sense of agency, but just in general, how to behave, how to act, and the ethos and personal values to hold. And part of the reason I always try and find time to reply to and help newer agents entering the industry is because of Gino and the time he gave to me. He was one of only 3 agents who responded when I sought advice on entering the industry, and one of those was not very helpful or constructive, I must say. And the other was another gentleman I have a huge amount of respect for, and that was Tony Stevens, who at the time had some huge football clients. But over time, Gino's relationship with me did turn more into a friendship, and we helped one another. I could never have Gino's knowledge of the industry because he had been in it since the first generation of FIFA licensed agents, the time of in-person interviews and having to pay a bond to FIFA. But in the end, I was able to help Gino a bit when it came to the clarification on new regulations and, shall we say, the more legislative side of the industry. And one of the last things Gino and I were able to achieve together was in regards to his license, because he was always keen to do everything right by the regulations, and even more so by his clients. He was always very client focused. And as such, it was at a time when he was receiving quite aggressive treatment for his illness, and he wanted to temporarily defer his license renewal. And this was due to him having trouble completing the CPD at the time because of his health, and also some bugs he was experiencing the agent's platform like a lot of other people. And FIFA wouldn't defer this. They wanted him to suspend his license, which would mean he couldn't act. I even suspect they didn't believe he was ill at the time. But with some help from someone in the FIFA tech team, we were able to get things sorted, and he was able to still assist and support clients, albeit in a slightly reduced capacity. But Gino was always full of wise words, encouragement, and also a voice of calm and professionalism. And as such, I would like to just finish this by offering 2 pieces of advice that I took from Gino, and there were far too many of those to mention over time, but these were at the very start. The first was almost subconscious, because Gino was always immaculate in the way he dressed and also the way he acted. And he did intimate at times something along the lines of, present yourself the way you want to be perceived. And only over time did I learn why he said that. And that is the image and stereotype that football agents often have. But the second is probably the one I use the most with newer agents. And that is, you can be a successful agent, but it is going to take a huge amount of time, resources, effort, hard work, and a little bit of good fortune along the way. So Gino, wherever you are, thank you for your help, pal, advice, support and encouragement, and above all the friendship over the years. This industry needs more like you, and you will be missed.
Yes, rest in peace, Gino. I've never met Gino, but obviously he's had a big influence on your agent career, Jonathan, and very poignant words. Yes, the exam's on this week at the time of recording. It's a different landscape. Candidates can have it from home. It would be very interesting how it goes. Anyone taking it and listening to this podcast, please send us a message on our socials on any interesting feedback on how you found it, because it's the first time it's happening this way. Now, with the transfer window open in many countries, there's always an opportunity to give some basic advice to newer or less experienced agents. But I'm going to pivot here. You know, I like that word, Jonathan. There's a quote from an NFL, National Football League's agent, Tom Condon, that I like. And he mentions the way he recruits players. And I'll quote, "I recruit on a formula of intelligence, character, and passion for the game." I like that quote, but I would add a bit extra. If you're going to recruit players or clients, especially players, add athleticism, explosiveness, which are now fundamental in the game. Obviously, tactical and technical technique, psychology, and one other thing, EQ, emotional intelligence, EQ. But also, what Tom Condon said is preparation is the key as an agent. And I'll quote him again. "We break it down. We go through each one to make sure our players are very prepared for each hurdle. You need to assist your players in preparing for each hurdle, especially if there's a trial or going to a club or a new club, etc." So it's about developing a strategy for each player to ensure they present well. And for agents who maybe weren't ex-players or not coaches or had a bigger role in the game, the key here is for me to talk to as many coaches and football directors as you probably could, develop those relationships, not just the relationships, but also understand where the game's going. We mentioned data earlier. Game models and the way teams are recruiting is very, very important. The other thing is there's got to be some synergy now between a scout and an agent. Agent needs to look at working together with scouts to combine their insights to support, especially young talent. I know that scouts, they can bring very honest assessments about players, their potential, their upside, their risks, their areas for growth, their temperament, and what type of player that suits what league and what club. And agents need this information if they can't do it themselves, so they can invest in the promotion of players, the mentoring of players, and try to broking deals in order to get them a club. And an interesting thing that I actually saw, Jonathan, on LinkedIn, I saw one agent, he's quite noted, I think he's a Belgium agent. He contacted 92 clubs about a player. He got feedback whether the player was too expensive, not our fit, not our profile. But that's interesting, putting a player to 92 clubs. Obviously, he's got the relationship with those clubs, but it sees how much work can go into at least one player. This is 92. Some players, you're lucky 1, 2 clubs and they're interested, but we can see a whole different ballgame when you're putting players to 92 clubs. But it happens. You've got to pitch because there's a lot of closed doors, especially for players who aren't at the top level.
And over the course of the second season of The Agent's Angle, the football agent's world has seen many changes. And with that, we have also seen a lot of changes ourselves, which we hope will result in positive developments on both fronts. You, Peter, of course, took the huge leap to move on from your former compliance and investigation role to dedicate more time to your sport and football law interests, which of course relates heavily to the agent's world. And I also have taken a bit of a different approach to mediation in football and sports disputes, with the focus now being more on allowing sports participants to settle disputes confidentially. As just in football alone, agents, players and clubs increasingly don't want their private disputes heard before the likes of a national association, FIFA or even CAS, let alone the scrutiny that may also come with it. But also during this season of the show, we have noted that with the mass and increasing uncertainty in the wake of FFAR, plus the widely acknowledged and fractured state of the football agent world and regulatory space, this also presents opportunities, if only to assist the football agent industry to try and tick along. And thus, we're also now working on projects together, despite being on opposite sides of the world, for various football participants and stakeholders, not least allowing us to actually work with others, including many of those who have been guests here on The Agent's Angle.
Yes, Jonathan, it's been a very interesting season, and also for us, both me and you individually, some interesting changes as well, and where our roles are and where we're heading to things. But I just want to finish on a couple of key notes, because I do like talking about the transfer business and the agent business. And there was an interesting article by Bill Connolly on transfer trends and what agents need to be aware of. And I'll be very brief here, but Portugal to Premier League is seen as a proven pathway. The research supports it. It is a data or a research type episode. Players transition from Portugal's Premier League to the Premier League have a notable success rate, average of 50.7 league minutes played in their first season. I won't go with players who've transferred from there. Whereas Serie A is increasingly seen as a destination for aging players seeking lucrative contracts with Juventus or AC Milan. So very different market. And some of the transfer trends that agents and market insights that this article raised that agents need to be aware of is that out of a study of 2,000 high-profile transfers over the past decades reveals that players from leagues like La Liga and Premier League tend to have higher success rate than League One and Eredivisie, which is the Dutch league. That's very, very interesting. This analysis based on the percentage of league minutes. So something of an indicator for agents to look at, especially if they want to deal with the Premier League. Now, another point to note is, and because it's the end of the second season, we're heading into the transfer window, is you need to be creative and innovative as an agent. Yes, hold on to some old school values like do what you say you're going to do. That's very important. But you also need to be aware of the way the transfer market is evolving. And one interesting article that came on board was the Antony deal, the Brazilian winger Antony between Real Betis and Manchester United. Now, Real Betis don't have the money to fully sign Antony from Manchester United. So there is a move for a shared ownership, co-ownership model. It's not allowed in the Premier League, but it is allowed in Spain, where both clubs can benefit from any increase in Antony's market value. Real Betis want to keep the player, but can't afford him fully. Man United most likely want to offload the player, so they're going to come to some sort of agreement. It could be a loan with a mandatory purchase clause, or could be a sell-on clause down the track. The reason I raise this is agents also got to be involved in the creative deal-making. This is a case where clubs have to be creative because Real Betis can't afford the budget. So an agent has to be able to help facilitate, in this case, maybe a shared agreement. So you've got to be across the way deals are structured as much as the talent side. And that is, I think, very, very important. The final thing I want to highlight, and I don't want to talk ourselves up, I think in terms of this podcast, we've done our best to help agents get insights in a lot of different dynamics in the agent industry. Clubs, players, the agent associations. Not here to give us any pats on the back, but I really believe and sincerely believe that with this podcast, we've added some value, at least a little, in terms of what we've provided and the information and the stories. Also through our guests, we've had fantastic guests, but we do pride ourselves also on our research and our experience in giving practical advice to agents and insights to agents, both in the agents industry and the intersection of the agents industry with players, clubs, leagues, and federations. The other thing is we've tried to pick themes. I know FFAR has dominated a lot of our podcasts, but we've tried to also...
It makes me come out in hives.
But we've tried to unpack some other key themes. What the FIFA Agent Worker Group is doing, what are some of the conferences out there, what's the new role of football lawyers, some agent cases, unlicensed or agents suing clubs, vice versa, player transfer trends, as we've just done a little bit today. But all of this, it's all about transparency for me and Jonathan. No fear, no favoritism, and for respect for the business, respect for all the really good agents that go out there and seek to do what they do. And I'll just make a final farewell. Thank you to all who've taken the time to send us messages of support. Please share this show. We'll be very grateful and really appreciate you listening to us. We can sometimes be long-winded, but we mean well, and I hope you've enjoyed this podcast. Bye from me.
And so, the end is near. Don't worry, we aren't about to burst into song. But this indeed is the end of this second season of the Agents Angle. And one final thing before we go, and that is a thank you to all those who have helped us with this season of the show, not least our guests, without whom it probably wouldn't be possible, beyond a bit of nonsense, rambling, and of course ranting at times. So hopefully I haven't missed anyone here, but thank you this season to Mikel, Stefano, Loic, Erkut, Ian, Gianluca, Glyn, Jeremy, Mohammed, Havoye, Luis Fernando, Willem, Timon, and Silky. And also an extra thank you to Dev for his support in encouraging a few participants who may not normally have participated in such a project. And in an attempt to say something poignant to end this season of the Agents Angle, Yes, this industry isn't so much at a crossroads, but more so on a repetitive ring road with none of us really knowing which exit to get off at. But I still think there is an opportunity to work together and make sure we get to a safe destination without all the road rage or collisions and accidents along the way. And that isn't just directed at various agent associations or even national associations, leagues, federations, or other stakeholders, and also FIFA, but also individual agents. Because whether you are a new agent bringing fresh insights and enthusiasm, or an established agent with knowledge and experience to share, these are opportunities that should be mutually beneficial and maybe even lead to friendships in what is often a lonely industry. So with that in mind, take a leaf out of Gino's book. Be professional, be courteous, treat others with respect, and try to consider their position as well as yours, and encourage others in the football agent industry to do the same. It may not bring the Rolexes and Range Rovers many desire, but hopefully it will bring things of far greater value to the fore. So from me, bye for now. And Gino, thank you, pal. God bless.
The purpose of the Agent's Angle podcast is to provide news, information and facilitate discussion on regulatory matters, policies, business trends and issues affecting football agents worldwide. The opinions and recommendations presented in this podcast are for general information only and should never be considered legal or professional advice. Furthermore, the views expressed by guests are their own and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. Thank you for listening.